The fluorescent lights hum at 0200 hours, and Sarah Chen moves through Sacred Heart's trauma floor like someone who has learned to disappear into her own invisibility. 3 years of the graveyard shift, 3 years of night after night sliding through these corridors in scrubs that fit like a second skin, a name tag that says nothing of consequence. Her hands move with the practiced economy of someone counting exits without thinking, noting the crash cart position, the emergency supplies, the locations of all for stairwells. Muscle memory from another life. A life the Navy said never happened. The patch is sewn into her jacket lining, faded now, barely visible even to her own fingers when she touches it in the break room at midnight, when no one is watching. She traces it the way other people trace wedding rings, a ritual, a tether, a reminder that Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen existed once, for 13 years, before the Baghdad operation went sideways and the Pentagon erased her entirely. Before they told her to vanish. Before her son stopped calling. Her shift began like every other shift. Graveyard means quiet. Means the senior residents go home. Means the attending physicians trust the nurses because they have to. Sarah prefers the quiet. Prefers being the person no one remembers, the one who catches the mistakes others miss because she is watching from the periphery, hands always moving, mouth never opening. Her co-workers eat lunch without her, gather around the coffee station and fall silent when she approaches. They do not know why they do this. They only know something about her makes them uncomfortable, the way she moves, maybe, or the way her eyes see things before they happen. She checks the vitals on 3 post-op patients in Bay 1, documenting the rhythms, noting the subtle drop in the second patient's oxygen saturation that has not yet triggered the alarm. Not dangerous yet. Soon. She makes a mental note to watch it. She will mention nothing to the day's shift, they will notice, or they will not, and that is no longer her responsibility. She learned that lesson the hard way 3 years ago, when speaking up got people killed or worse, got them noticed by the wrong people. At 0247, the ambulance bay doors crash open like a defibrillator shock to the floor. Sarah's clipboard clatters against the tile, the sound sharp and metallic in the sudden chaos. She is moving before the thought finishes forming, her body recognizes the pattern, the urgency, the particular rhythm of a level 1 trauma. Blood on the stretcher. A man's body twisted with the specific geometry of ballistic trauma. GSW ×5, the medic is saying, Delta Force officer, firefight gone wrong in a civilian zone, security locked down, Pentagon notification pending. The face on the gurney stops her breath for exactly 1 heartbeat. Colonel Webb. She would know that face in a darker room than this, in a worse light, at a greater distance. She saw it once in Jake's phone, before Jake stopped answering his phone, before the folded flag arrived at 0800 hours on a Tuesday with 3 officers in dress blues and voices that sounded like apologies. Webb's face was younger then, smiling, one arm around her son's shoulders. Webb was major then. Webb was alive. Webb was the last person to see her son breathing. Sarah's hands are steady. Her breathing has not changed. No one is watching her anyway, they are all focused on the stretcher, on the bleeding man, on the urgency that has just rewritten everyone's night. She steps back, out of the way she always steps back, the way she has perfected over 3 years of making herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Her scrubs are blue today. Tomorrow they will be blue again. No one will remember what color she was wearing. Dr. Sterling arrives at 0251, for minutes behind the ambulance, and Sarah notices he smells like cologne and the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no. He is tall in the way that photographs capture well, with silver at his temples that cost money to maintain at that precise shade. His entrance is designed, the hurried walk that is not quite a run, the expression of grave concern that will photograph beautifully for the hospital newsletter. He is already talking before he reaches the bed, positioning himself at the head, making the space his own the way apex predators make territory theirs without speaking. Colonel Webb, I'm Dr. Sterling, Director of Trauma Surgery at Sacred Heart. His voice carries the particular resonance of someone used to being listened to. You are in excellent hands. We are going to stabilize you, get you into surgery, and get you back to your command. Norfolk is prepared for officers at your level. The words are generic, but the inflection is specific. I know who you are, I understand your value, I am the right man for this moment. Sarah recognizes the calculation in it. A Delta Force colonel is high profile. A successful save is career advancement. A recovery and a grateful Pentagon recommendation is the kind of thing that builds reputations, secures board positions, creates the narrative of the brilliant surgeon who saved a special operations officer when others could not. She notices Sterling does not ask about the extent of the wounds. He only glances at them, nods slightly, as if confirming a suspicion. 5 GSWs, 1 through the right shoulder, entry and exit wounds bleeding steadily but not catastrophically. 1 in the left lower abdomen, trajectory unknown, potentially visceral damage. 1 through the right thigh, femoral artery possibly compromised. 1 grazing wound along his ribs. 1 in the left flank, deep, concerning, the trajectory suggesting the round tumbled after entry. The trauma team assembles with the sound of controlled urgency, shoes on tile, gloved fingers, equipment clattering, rhythmic beeping as the monitor picks up Webb's heart rate and blood pressure. 118/72. Still compensating. Still stable. Still time. Sarah watches from the corner of Bay 3, her clipboard still in hand, her body a study in perfect non-presence. She has already made the calculations without moving her lips. She knows Webb's blood type from looking at him. That is not a useful skill, except it has saved lives before. She knows his wound pattern suggests small caliber rounds, possibly 9mm, fired from multiple positions, which means the firefight was coordinated, which means this was not an accident. She knows his oxygen saturation is adequate but not comfortable, which means his lungs are in distress even though the X-ray has not been done yet. She knows all of this and says nothing. The blood bank is called. Type and cross for 8 units. Surgery is alerted. The OR will be ready in 6 minutes. Dr. Sterling is already making the clinical decisions, which wounds to address first, which team members to call, whether to call vascular for the femoral injury or handle it himself. His hands move with competence, Sarah notes. He is not incompetent. He is not a fraud. He is simply a man who has never had to operate under fire, who has never had to decide which casualty to save when there are 13 casualties and 1 pair of hands, who has never felt the weight of someone dying in his arms because the rules of engagement prevented him from shooting back. Sterling glances up from the abdomen wound and his eyes pass across the room, across the nursing staff, and do not quite land on Sarah. She is, in this moment, exactly as invisible as she has trained herself to be. Her face is neutral. Her posture is flat. Her presence occupies space without demanding acknowledgement. We need better access on that right shoulder, Sterling says, gesturing. Hemostats and suction. I want to see the full trajectory before we move him. And get me the full trauma panel, CBC, comprehensive metabolic, lactate. I need to know what we are dealing with before surgery. A nurse moves to comply. The room reorganizes itself around Sterling's instructions like iron filings around a magnet. Sarah watches the way he positions himself, the way he creates focus and authority through simple presence. It is a technique. She has seen it before, in the Tactical Operations Center in Baghdad, where the commander's voice and posture created certainty in an uncertain situation. Sterling does not have the weight of 13 lives depending on his next decision. He only has 1. And yet he carries his version of that weight as though it is the heaviest thing in the world. At 0256, Webb opens his eyes. His hand moves toward his side, toward the largest wound, the one in his flank, the one that is bleeding the most, the one that hurts with the particular sharpness of a round passing through muscle and possibly deeper. Sterling touches his shoulder, gentle but firm. Colonel, you are safe. You are at Sacred Heart Hospital in Norfolk. We have you. Do not move. Do not touch the bandages. I need you to focus on your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that for me? It is a good bedside manner. It is textbook. It is precisely what the trauma literature recommends for patients coming out of shock. And Sarah, watching from the corner, notes that Sterling has not once looked at the monitor. He has not checked Webb's oxygen saturation. He has not asked about the trajectory of the flank wound, the one that concerns her most, the one that could have nicked the kidney or worse, the one that requires the kind of decision-making that comes from experience under pressure. But that is not her place. That is not her role. She is not a surgeon. She is not a doctor. She is just the nurse who appears at shift change, who charts the vitals, who monitors the machines, who says nothing. That is who she is now. That is who she has been for 3 years. She touches the patch through her jacket lining one more time, the faded cloth rough under her fingertips, and then she turns back to her clipboard and begins documenting Webb's arrival with the clinical precision of someone recording information that belongs to a world she is no longer part of. She stands at the bedside with Webb's chart, her eyes cataloguing what her training already knows. The left leg. Subtle but present, the distal pulse weaker than the right, the skin tone just off, that faint pallor creeping up from the ankle. Compartment syndrome. The muscle tissue swelling inside the fascial sheath, building pressure like a blood pressure cuff that won't release, cutting off circulation, preparing to kill the limb in hours if no one intervenes. She has seen this before. She has held the hands of soldiers who lost legs because someone missed the signs. Dr. Sterling stands 3 feet away, gesturing to the colonel's daughter and 2 Pentagon liaisons in dress uniforms, their posture rigid with the kind of authority that fills rooms without speaking. Sterling's voice carries that practiced confidence, the tone of a man who has never been questioned in his professional life. Sarah waits for the right moment, the one where Sterling's attention pivots away from his audience long enough for a question to register as helpful rather than presumptuous. It never comes. But the colonel's condition won't wait. 3 years of invisibility has not erased what she knows about dying tissue. She approaches the bedside quietly. "Doctor, I think we should check for compartment syndrome in the left leg. The distal pulses are." Sterling's head turns like a predator tracking movement. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Nurse Chen, when I need a bedpan emptied, I'll call you. Leave the medicine to actual doctors." The silence that follows is the kind that has texture. The daughter's face tightens. One of the liaisons shifts his weight, the dress uniform creaking slightly. The heart monitor continues its steady beep, indifferent to humiliation. Sarah absorbs the impact with one measured breath, her right hand finding the patch through her jacket lining, the rough cloth of the unit insignia, the only proof that she was ever anything but invisible. She does not look away. She does not flinch. She simply nods and steps back, making space for him to be the expert, the authority, the man who knows best. "You'll have to forgive our nursing staff," Sterling tells the family, turning his back to Sarah as if she has already ceased to exist. "Sometimes they forget their place." The daughter's lips compress into a thin line of agreement. The liaisons exchange glances that say everything. This hospital, this doctor, this system, it is working exactly as intended. That afternoon, Sarah sits in the break room with her lunch. A plastic container of salad, sad lettuce wilting against tomatoes that never ripen properly, the kind of meal you eat because you have 45 minutes and your body requires fuel. She opens her container. 3 nurses at the corner table are Martinez, who has asked Sarah for study help twice, Chen, who is no relation but shares the surname, and Rodriguez, who always says good morning, gather their lunches mid-bite. They do not finish their conversations. They do not acknowledge her presence with even the courtesy of eye contact. They simply stand, collect their things, and relocate to the hallway in a coordinated movement that feels less like coincidence and more like a choreographed response. Another nurse appears in the doorway, sees Sarah, reverses course without breaking stride. The room temperature drops with each departure until the only sound is the fluorescent lights above her head, that electrical hum that becomes louder in silence, and the soft click of her plastic fork against Tupperware. She eats alone under those lights for 37 minutes. By Friday, the write-up appears on the public staff board outside the nurse's station, printed in a font large enough to read from the medication room 20 feet away. Sarah Chen, formal reprimand. Overstepping scope of practice. Undermining physician authority in front of patient family and visitors. Pattern of insubordination. Personnel file, incident documented. A cluster of CNAs reads it, their eyes returning to Sarah as she passes with her supply cart. She feels their gaze the way soldiers feel incoming fire, a weight that announces itself before impact. Sterling stands nearby, adjusting his tie, not quite hiding his smile, and Sarah stops moving. She does not speed up. She does not deflect. She makes direct eye contact with him across the corridor, lets the silence build between them like pressure in an enclosed space. The tear comes without warning. Not from fear. Not from shame. From the sheer force of restraint, the muscle of discipline holding back 3 years of everything beneath the surface. She wipes it away without looking down, without breaking her gaze from his, and the gesture itself becomes a kind of defiance. Sterling's smile widens. He leans against the wall with the posture of a man who has already won. Colonel Webb deserves better than your ego, Doctor. Her voice does not shake. It sits in the space between them like a weapon laid down quietly on a table. He needs someone who will catch what you miss. Not to be right. To keep him whole. Sterling's expression shifts, not from remorse, but from the recognition that she has just stated a truth he cannot contradict without revealing his incompetence. His hand moves to his phone as if summoning reinforcements. Careful, Chen. I have the chief of medicine on speed dial. I've ended careers with one phone call. He lets that statement sit. One call, and you'll never work in healthcare again. Anywhere. That's a promise. Sarah does not respond. There is nothing to say to a man whose power rests entirely on the ability to destroy. She turns and walks back to her tasks, back to the visibility of invisibility, back to the careful choreography of existing in spaces where she is not supposed to matter. The patch burns against her ribs like a coal that will not cool, the faded cloth of a unit that no longer officially exists, sewn inside the lining of a jacket that smells of hospital antiseptic and rain from a life before Norfolk. She touches it through her scrubs. Proof. Evidence. The only thread connecting her to the woman she was. The shift continues. Vitals checked, charts updated, medications delivered with the precision of someone following protocols designed to keep her small. The colonel sleeps under the hum of monitors, his left leg beginning the silent work of dying inside its own pressure, the compartment syndrome advancing with the patience of a biological process that cannot be rushed or stopped by a nurse who is no longer permitted to speak. Sarah watches from the doorway during her 2,100 rounds. The pulse in his foot is already weaker. She has maybe 18 hours before irreversible damage begins. She documents it in careful language that will not sound like a challenge to anyone who reads it later. The shift stretches toward midnight. At 0300 hours, the alarm does not announce itself politely. It screams. The kind of sound that pulls every medical professional within earshot toward the source like a rope tied around the spine. Sarah is restocking the supply cart 3 floors down when she hears it, that cascading tone pattern that means seconds, not minutes, that means the body is already in failure and the window for intervention is closing with each heartbeat. She runs. The elevator takes years. The stairwell is faster. Her legs remember running toward explosions instead of away from them, remember the weight of a trauma bag and the smell of diesel and blood, remember the physics of a collapsing ceiling and the sound of screaming that your brain learns to filter out or you do not survive the sound. The ICU doors burst open beneath her hands. The colonel's monitor shows the cascade, oxygen saturation dropping from 94 to 78 to 61, the numbers climbing down toward the red zone where human consciousness ends. His chest is asymmetric. The right side rises and falls. The left side is still. His trachea deviates right, pulled by the pressure building in the left pleural space. The jugular veins distend like cords. The ventilator alarm wails alongside the monitor because the machine cannot push oxygen into lungs that have no room. Every clinical sign aligns into one diagnosis written in the language of dying tissue: tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the chest cavity building pressure, crushing the heart, collapsing the lung, 9 minutes from cardiac arrest. Maybe less. The responding resident, a young man whose name Sarah does not know, whose hands are shaking, reaches for his phone to page Sterling. His voice climbs toward panic. Code, I need. Sarah is already moving. She is already at the crash cart. The needle is already in her hand, a 14-gauge angiocath, the kind that goes through skin and muscle and enters the pleural space with the force of someone who knows exactly where the landmark is, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the anatomy burned into her hands from a different life in a different desert where there were no administrators to call. Her hands find the spot without consulting her conscious mind. Muscle memory. Training that survives erasure. The kind of knowledge that lives in the body when every official record of its existence has been destroyed. She drives the needle through skin, through fascia, through muscle. The resistance gives way. The catheter slides past the pleura and into the space where pressure has been building like a storm that cannot break. For one moment nothing happens. Then the air rushes out, a hiss so violent it sounds almost like relief, like the moment a fist unclenches, like the body finally exhaling something it has been holding. The monitor steadies. The oxygen saturation climbs, 78, 82, 88, 91, each number a nerve returning to consciousness. Webb's chest rises and falls evenly now. The left lung expands. The pressure releases. The color returns to his face like blood remembering how to flow where it is needed. The resident stares, phone still at his ear, a young man witnessing a procedure performed in the ICU by someone whose hands moved with the kind of certainty that belongs only to people who have already done this when the stakes were so much higher that the rules stopped existing. Sarah is documenting the decompression, time, placement, outcome, the clinical notation that makes the procedure official when the footsteps announce Dr. Sterling's arrival. He strides into the ICU in wrinkled scrubs, surveying the colonel, the used needle catheter, the deflated syringe, and finally Sarah's face. His expression transforms across 3 seconds like a film strip flipped too fast: confusion, comprehension, thermonuclear rage. His voice drops to a register that somehow carries farther than a shout. You performed a needle decompression. You. A nurse. Sarah meets his eyes. Her right hand touches her jacket without thinking. That is practicing medicine without a license, Chen. That is a felony. He would have died in 4 minutes, doctor. You arrived in 8. Sterling pulls out his phone right there in the ICU. The room goes still. The ventilator hums its mechanical rhythm. The monitors pulse their data. And Sterling makes his calls: hospital president, board chair, state nursing oversight committee, each conversation louder than the last, his voice climbing, his words precise and devastating, activating every connection in his network the way a commander coordinates artillery to level a position. The resident backs away slowly. The nurses thin out. Nobody wants to stand too close to a man who is ending someone's career in real time. But that was not the worst part. That was only the beginning. The monitor screamed at 0300 hours. Not a gentle escalation. Not a warning beep that built gradually. Sarah heard it from the break room, a sound like a smoke alarm mixed with a car horn, the specific pitch that meant the patient's oxygen saturation had crossed below the critical threshold and was still falling. She moved before her brain caught up, coffee abandoned, the cardboard cup hitting the tile with a hollow crack. Colonel Webb's chest heaved against the ventilator's resistance. His oxygen sat dropping like a stone in water: 89, 82, 74. The numbers on the monitor glowed red. His skin had taken on the grey undertone of someone whose blood was no longer carrying oxygen efficiently. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He was conscious. He knew something was catastrophically wrong. Sarah read the picture instantly. The breathing effort. The distended neck veins like cords pulled tight. The asymmetrical chest wall movement, the left side barely moving at all. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in his chest cavity, building pressure against his heart with every breath the ventilator pushed in, compressing the chambers, suffocating him from the inside out. She had for minutes before his heart stopped. Maybe 5. Dr. Sterling was in the surgical lounge 2 floors down, his phone face up on the table next to a half-empty coffee. He would take at least 90 seconds to get here. In 90 seconds, Colonel Webb would be dead. Sarah didn't reach for the call button. She moved to the crash cart instead, her hands already steady, already knowing what she needed. 14-gauge angiocath needle. The largest bore available. She prepped the second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the anatomically perfect location, muscle memory from a sandstorm 3 years ago when mortars fell and a Delta operator named Thompson couldn't breathe and the only option was a needle and steady hands and the knowledge that hesitation meant death. The antiseptic cold on his chest. One breath. The needle advanced. The resistance of the pleural membrane, then. The hiss of air escaping. Immediate and unmistakable, the sound of pressure venting like a tire blowout, the trapped atmosphere releasing back into the environment where it belonged instead of crushing a man's heart. Sarah's left hand stayed pressed against his chest, holding the needle steady while her right hand worked the syringe, ensuring the position was locked. The monitor's screen downshifted. Sarah. 67. 73. The rhythm stabilized. His oxygen saturation climbed, 76, 81, 88, 92. His chest wall color shifted from gray back toward pink. The ventilator's resistance eased. Colonel Webb's eyes, which had been locked in the white-rimmed panic of suffocation, refocused. His body visibly relaxed against the mattress. "You're stable," Sarah said quietly, and it wasn't reassurance, it was a status report delivered with the flat precision of someone who had done this exact thing in worse conditions. The pressure released. "You can breathe." She secured the needle with tape, her hands moving with mechanical precision, each motion deliberate and practiced. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Oxygen sat holding at 94%. Heart rate dropping from 142 to 108. The crisis had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Sarah was washing her hands at the bedside sink when the ICU doors burst open hard enough to rattle the frame. Dr. Sterling arrived breathing like he'd run, his white coat still unbuttoned, his hair slightly disarranged. His eyes found the needle taped to Webb's chest, found Sarah standing calmly with water dripping from her hands, found the monitor displaying stable vitals. He understood immediately what had happened. He also understood that Sarah Chen had just performed a procedure that belonged exclusively in the scope of physician practice, that she had moved without authorization, without his presence, without asking permission. His face went the color of a stopped stoplight. "Step away from the patient," Sterling said. His voice came out controlled, but barely. "Now." Sarah dried her hands on the paper towel dispenser. She didn't look at him. The pneumothorax resolved. His O2 sat is stable. That needle decompression was performed without physician oversight. Sterling's words came clipped, precise, the tone someone uses when they're recording evidence. He pulled out his phone. "You performed an invasive procedure you are not qualified to perform. That is practicing medicine without a license. That is a felony." He turned away from Sarah entirely, his jaw clenching as he dialed. His first call went to the hospital president, David Bancroft, who apparently answered even at 0315 in the morning because Sterling didn't wait for voicemail. "We have a critical incident. Nurse Chen, one of the night shift staff, performed a needle decompression without authorization. Yes, the patient is stable, that's not the point. She performed a physician-level procedure. I need her credentialing file locked immediately and her access revoked. This needs to go to risk management and the state board." The second call went to the chief of risk management, a woman named Patricia Hayes whose voice came through the phone even from 2 rooms away, professional and alarmed. Sterling's side of the conversation was brief: "Invasive procedure performed by unlicensed nursing staff during my patient's care. The needle decompression she performed is textbook practicing medicine without a license. We need investigators here." The third call went to the state board's emergency line, the one for reporting immediate threats to patient safety, though Sterling framed it backward, not as a threat prevented but as a violation committed. His voice was smooth, practiced, like he'd made this call before. Dr. Charles Sterling, Sacred Heart Hospital, Norfolk. I need to report a nurse who just performed an invasive medical procedure outside her scope of practice. Her name is Sarah Chen. Chen. I witnessed the entire incident. He ended the call and turned back to face Sarah, and his expression had shifted into something worse than anger. It was satisfaction. The look of a man who had just activated a network and knew exactly how that network would respond. "You're finished here," Sterling said quietly. "Before I'm done, you'll lose your license, your job, and any ability to work in healthcare again. You crossed a line you couldn't uncross." Sarah looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Her face showed nothing, no fear, no defensiveness, no trembling. Just the calm assessment of someone calculating odds. Then she turned back to the monitor, checked Colonel Webb's vital signs one more time, and waited for security without another word. They came within the hour. Jenkins, the guard who always smiled at her in the break room, who had never given her anything but kindness in 3 years of night shifts, escorted her to her locker in the basement by 0:45. His face was apologetic but immovable. Protocol. Orders from upstairs. Nothing personal. Sarah opened her locker and stared at the contents. 3 years of accumulated small things, a cracked coffee mug with a faded navy anchor, a dying succulent that she kept forgetting to water, a photo of Jake in his dress uniform from boot camp graduation, his smile so bright it made the image seem to glow. She picked them up one by one and placed them into the cardboard box someone had brought her. At the very bottom, she removed the navy jacket she'd worn under her hospital coat every shift for 1,000 nights. The faded unit patch was sewn into the lining, stitched there so carefully that no one could see it unless they knew to look. She folded the jacket and laid it on top of the photograph. "I'm sorry," Jenkins said, and he meant it. "I know you. You're a good nurse." Sarah didn't answer. She took the box and walked toward the employee exit, and Jenkins had to hurry to keep up with her pace. The rain outside was the kind that fell sideways, cold and angry, the pre-dawn darkness so complete it seemed to have weight. The streetlights on Granby blurred into halos. Sarah stood at the bus stop, the cardboard box already softening in her arms, the bottom edge beginning to give way. She looked down the empty street in both directions. No safe house was waiting. No extraction team. No mission debrief. Just a woman holding the last physical evidence of her own existence, standing in the rain at 5:45 in the morning with no place to go and no identity to claim. The 6 a.m. bus pulled up to the curb with a pneumatic hiss, the doors folding open. Sarah didn't board it. She stood motionless, watching the rain drum against the cardboard, watching the ink on Jake's photograph begin to bleed at the edges. The bus driver waited 3 seconds, then closed the doors and pulled away. Sarah remained at the stop, alone on the empty street. Then the headlights cut through the downpour from behind her, and boots, good boots, military-issue boots, the kind that cost $1,000 and lasted through wars, hit the wet pavement with precision. A black SUV had pulled up to the curb, still running, engine idling like something dangerous kept on a short leash. A man in dark tactical gear emerged from the driver's side door, and his eyes found her with immediate recognition. Not surprise. Not search. Recognition. "Senior Chief Chen," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had been looking for exactly 4 years and 3 months. The rain kept falling. Sarah kept holding the box. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness over Norfolk, everything was about to change. The cardboard box felt heavier than 3 years of silence. Sarah stood at the bus stop on Boattoot Street, rain hammering the pavement like mortar fire, and watched the red traffic light blur through sheets of water. Inside the box, a cracked coffee mug from 2019, a dying succulent she'd kept on her locker shelf, and the faded unit patch she'd sewn into her jacket lining the night before she'd disappeared. The patch was the only proof she'd ever been anything but invisible. The pre-dawn darkness pressed down like a weighted blanket. 0537 hours. She'd timed her exile carefully, early enough that no one would see her, late enough that the night shift was too busy to notice she was gone. The hospital sat 3 blocks behind her, its windows glowing against the graphite sky. She wasn't looking back. That was the protocol. You walk out, you keep walking. But then the headlights cut through the downpour. A black SUV screamed around the corner like it was being chased. It didn't stop at the red light. It didn't slow down. It came toward the hospital with the kind of velocity that meant one thing: tactical entry. Sarah's eyes tracked it automatically, muscle memory faster than thought, and she saw the silhouettes through the rain-streaked windows. 2 figures. Tactical gear. Weapons visible even in the pre-dawn murk. Her body went rigid. Not now. Not here. Not after 3 years of being nobody. The SUV shrieked into the ambulance bay at 0612 hours, and 2 men in full tactical gear kicked out of the doors, moving like they'd trained for exactly this moment. No badges. No uniforms. Just professionals with purpose and weapons with silencers screwed onto the muzzles. They moved past the security desk like it wasn't there. Sarah didn't think. Didn't breathe. Didn't consider protocol. She abandoned the cardboard box on the wet concrete and ran. The service entrance was exactly where she remembered it, the same entrance she'd used to slip in for night shifts, the one the day staff never monitored. Her scrubs were still soaked from her walk to the bus stop, but now she was moving like the hospital was a combat zone and she had a mission. Because she did. The Baghdad operation was classified, which meant it was buried, which meant loose ends, and loose ends meant the people they'd testified against had resources and reach and kill teams. Colonel Webb was upstairs in ICU Bay 4, still weak from 5 gunshot wounds, still probably sedated, completely defenseless. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her lungs burning the way they had in the Haditha corridor when she'd been running towards smoke instead of away from it. The hallway on the 3rd floor was quiet except for the ventilator hiss seeping from individual rooms. The fluorescent lights buzzed their mechanical hymn. And then she heard it, the muffled snap of the first gunshot, a sound she'd hoped never to hear again. The ICU guard outside Webb's room went down like his strings had been cut. Sarah exploded through the door as it was still swinging open. Webb's eyes widened. He was awake, lucid, a trauma patient whose adrenaline had kept him conscious through worse. He saw her and knew. The understanding passed between them in the millisecond before the door crashed inward behind her. The first round took her in the left shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. It didn't hurt yet, that came later, but the impact spun her sideways and she felt the shock wave rattle through her chest cavity. The second round came through her right side just above the hip and she gasped, not from pain but from the profound wrongness of it, the feeling of her body suddenly being a thing that could be unmade. She threw herself across Webb's bed anyway. The third round grazed her neck and she felt the hot bloom of blood slide down her collarbone, mixing with the rain still soaked into her scrubs. Her vision tunneled but her hands didn't shake. This was the thing about trauma work. The thing about surviving Baghdad. Your body remembered what to do even when your mind was screaming. She pressed her weight onto Webb's fur lines, keeping them patent, keeping the fluids flowing, keeping him alive the way she'd kept 13 operators alive in that safe house when the walls were coming down and the air smelled like copper and burning electronics. The tactical operators in the doorway, the ones sent to silence him, were met with hospital security who'd finally found their courage and their weapons. The hallway erupted into chaos that sounded like the world breaking. The lockdown alarm screamed. It was the sound of sirens in a place that was supposed to be safe. Webb's hand found her arm despite his injuries. Senior Chief. His voice was barely a whisper. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the 4 lines, on the monitors showing his heart rate steady despite everything, on her own blood dripping onto the floor in a pool that was growing wider. The pain was white-hot and familiar, she'd catalogued it before, knew it by name, understood it as data rather than damage. For breaths in. For breaths hold. For breaths out. The meditation of a woman who'd learned to survive things that weren't supposed to be survivable. Don't move, she said. The lines stay patent. Her blood was soaking into his sheets now, dark and pooling like it was alive and searching for somewhere to go. She could feel it running down her side, warm and terrifying, but her hand stayed steady. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now she was literally shielding a man with her own body in a way that was impossible to hide from. The security guards engaged the shooters in the hallway. There were sounds, gunshots that weren't muffled anymore because silencers weren't relevant when the mission was chaos, and shouts and the wet thud of impacts. Sarah maintained pressure on Webb's lines. This was what she knew how to do. This was the mission. Keep the patient alive. Keep the mission intact. Don't break composure. At 0634 hours, rotor wash rattled the ICU windows like someone was playing the sky like a drum. A Black Hawk was landing on the hospital roof. The sound of boots, real boots, military boots, the kind that echoed with authority rather than panic, came up the stairs. The tactical operators who'd tried to kill Webb were being secured by a new group of tactical operators, and Sarah understood without being told that this second wave was the one sent to protect, not destroy. The crisis team. The one she'd been erased to keep away from her. A man in full tactical gear with a rank insignia that read Captain cleared the ICU room and found her bleeding on Webb's bed, still holding the 4 lines, her composure cracking only around the edges where her life was draining out onto military-issue linens. He kneeled beside her and his face transformed. He recognized her. Not from the hospital files, she'd been systematically erased from those. He recognized her from somewhere deeper. From a briefing room. From classified operations. From the ghost tier network that tracked people who weren't supposed to exist. Senior Chief Chen, he said, and it wasn't a question. We've been looking for you for 3 years. Sarah didn't answer. She was watching the figure in dress uniform step through the doorway behind him, tears already cutting tracks down a face she'd thought she'd never see again except in the recurring nightmare that had become her life. Jake! Her son. Alive! The helicopter rotors cut the air like angry gods, and the lead operator, call sign Breaker, shoulders wide as a doorframe, stepped into the ICU blood-soaked and moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd spent 20 years solving problems with extreme prejudice. His eyes found Sarah first. Bleeding on the floor. Hand still on Colonel Webb's central line. Breaker's jaw locked. 1 second. 2. Then, Senior Chief Chen, we've been looking for you for 3 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the room went absolutely silent. The nurses who'd isolated her, the residents who'd watched Sterling humiliate her, the security team, all of them froze. Because Breaker's voice didn't carry a question. It carried recognition. The kind of recognition that rewrites everything that came before it. Sarah's eyes lifted to his. She didn't respond. That was the old training, never confirm, never explain, the walls stay up. But Breaker was already moving, already signaling his medics forward with 2 fingers, get her stabilized, get her prepped for surgery, move now. The hospital staff parted like water. Jenkins, the security guard who'd handed her that cardboard box at dawn, stood in the corner of the ICU and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. His hands had escorted out a trauma nurse. His hands had just witnessed those same hands save a classified Delta operator's life. The trauma surgeon on call, not Sterling, he was already gone, already called away from the hospital by the board president who discovered certain documentation discrepancies, moved with practiced efficiency. Bullet 1, through Sarah's right shoulder, missing the axillary artery by millimeters. Bullet 2, entry wound in her left anterior thorax, passing between ribs 4 and 5. Bullet 3, a graze along her right hip. The trauma surgeon's voice was steady, type and cross, 8 units whole blood, 2 units fresh frozen plasma, call anesthesia for immediate intubation. Sarah's O2 sat was 92 and dropping. The surgeon made the call, open the chest. Now. 18 hours later, in the recovery room, Sarah's eyes opened to find Jake sitting in a hospital chair that was too small for his 6'2" frame in a dress uniform that was too crisp, too new, too impossible. Mom. His voice cracked like adolescence and relief colliding. You were never dead. You were classified. He read from the Pentagon file with hands that trembled, his hands, not hers. Sarah's hands lay still on the blanket, wrapped in gauge, anchored by fours. She listened as her son's voice moved through the documentation: Silver Star for Extraordinary Heroism Under Fire, Sanjin Valley, Helm and Province, 2019. Pause. Navy Cross for Conspicuous Gallantry in the Face of Enemy Action, Baghdad, Jolan District, 2018. Pause. Personally responsible for extraction and emergency medical intervention with 13 Delta Force operators from a collapsed safe house under sustained small arms and mortar fire. Jake's voice broke on the last part. They said you were KIA. They said you were dead in an airstrike. They said the whole unit was gone. Sarah's eyes stayed on his. The tears on his face were different than hers. They were the kind that come from having lived in a lie for 3 years, believing your mother was in Arlington under a headstone, when really she'd been walking a trauma floor in Norfolk, invisible, serving a sentence of silence because some operations get disavowed and some heroes get erased, and that's the cost of the work nobody can ever talk about. The door opened and a SEAL team leader entered, call sign Iron Man, decorated like a Christmas tree, rank insignia that meant he'd signed off on classified operations. He moved to Sarah's bedside with the quiet reverence of someone approaching a monument. Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen holds more decorations than every doctor in this hospital combined. His voice was loud enough for the hallway to hear. And she just took 3 bullets for a mission that's still saving lives. For a colonel who's going to walk out of here because of her. He placed his hand on his chest, over his heart. Respect. Behind him, 3 more operators did the same. Hand to chest. The salute that says, I see you. I know what you did. I will never forget. The hospital staff who'd watched Sarah be escorted out that morning, the ones who'd eaten lunch in other rooms so they wouldn't sit near her, the ones who'd signed Sterling's complaints, the ones who'd been trained to believe that hierarchy meant obedience and that questioning a surgeon's judgment was insubordination, they stood in that recovery room and felt the ground shift again. And again. Until the entire hospital tilted on its axis. 72 hours later, the State Board of Nursing held a meeting that lasted 4 hours. Dr. Sterling arrived in his best suit, his hair perfect, his confidence polished. His lawyer sat beside him. They were going to win. Sterling had already called the donor whose wing bore his name. The board member whose son he'd mentored through residency. His network was solid. His reputation was excellent. The case against him was just a disgruntled nurse who'd overstepped and a Pentagon that didn't understand hospital chain of command. But the chief of medicine wouldn't meet his eyes. And the board chair opened with one sentence, Dr. Sterling, we've received a full briefing from the Department of Defense regarding Ms. Chen's credentials and security clearance. The color drained from his face in real time. The board laid out the rest with the precision of a surgical strike: negligence in the compartment syndrome diagnosis, documentation failures, hostile work environment, 6 nurses who came forward once they felt safe to speak, and, the final blow, a recommendation from the Pentagon that Sacred Heart demonstrate appropriate accountability. Sterling's phone calls that evening went unreturned. The donor's assistant said he was unavailable. The board member didn't answer. By Thursday, his attorney told him, resign or face a full investigation that will end your career anyway. Friday morning, the hospital president delivered the news in his office: medical privileges suspended, resignation recommended, effective immediately. 2 weeks later, Jenkins, the same security guard who'd handed Sarah her cardboard box, was instructed to escort Dr. Sterling from the building. Sterling carried a smaller cardboard box, his own now. Monogrammed pen set. Framed diplomas. A nameplate that no longer meant anything. I believe you know the way out, Doctor, Jenkins said, and the words hung in the air like a sentence reversal, like karma with a badge and a radio clipped to its belt. They say Sterling is selling supplemental insurance now, working from a folding table at a strip mall off Military Highway, his calls to former colleagues bouncing straight to voicemail. His letterhead still has his name. Nobody uses it. But in Arlington, Virginia, at a Pentagon ceremony with the kind of security that doesn't get discussed in news reports, Sarah Chen stands in dress blues that fit like she was born to them, because she was. The faded unit patch that she'd sewn into her jacket lining, the one that carried her through 3 years of invisibility, is now officially sewn onto her shoulder. Silver Star. Navy Cross. 2 Purple Hearts. Back pay for 3 years of forced silence. Reinstatement papers. Jake stands on her right, still in uniform, still breathing like someone who's been given back a miracle. Colonel Webb stands on her left, arm in a sling, eyes clear, the network that tried to kill him already dismantled by the investigation that followed his rescue. 17 arrests. 2 federal indictments. He looks at Sarah with the kind of gratitude that can't be spoken, only lived. The SecNav himself presents her reinstatement, and when he shakes her hand, there's a pause, a recognition passing between military minds. Your country needs you. We failed you. Come home. 2 days later, Sarah returns to Sacred Heart Hospital. But she doesn't arrive as a shadow anymore. She arrives as the new director of trauma services. The hospital board had made the request themselves, terrified of the federal attention, desperate to rebuild trust. They offered her the position with full autonomy, full authority, full support. Her first act is promoting the resident who ordered the compartment syndrome check despite Sterling's dismissiveness, the young doctor who risked his career to do what was right. Her second act is establishing a program recruiting veteran medics into nursing, because medicine needs more people who've already survived the impossible. In her new office on the 3rd floor, she keeps 3 things on her desk: the cracked coffee mug from the break room, the succulent that's finally thriving, and a photo of Jake at the Pentagon ceremony, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like they've just woken up from a 3-year nightmare. When Sarah walks the trauma floor now, staff meet her eyes with respect. Not the forced respect of hierarchy, but the earned respect of someone who's held the line when it mattered most. And sometimes, late in the graveyard shift when the hospital settles into that 0300 quiet, when the monitors beat their steady rhythm and the ventilators wheeze like sleeping giants, Sarah touches the patch on her shoulder and remembers something: she was never invisible. She was just waiting for the right moment to be seen. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub saving lives in the dark. If Sarah's story moved you, I want to hear what you would have done in her position. Have you ever been underestimated by someone in authority who didn't know your true value? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel for stories about quiet warriors who change everything. And share this video with someone who needs to remember, the person sitting next to you might be holding a lot more than you'll ever know. Thank you for watching.